The pocket watch had been sitting on Thomas's nightstand for 15 months, exactly where he'd placed it. The last morning he was well enough to wind it himself. I hadn't moved it. Not when I cleared his dresser, not when I sorted through his closet, not even when my daughter-in-law Krista offered to help me get organized 6 weeks after the funeral. I had thanked her and said I was fine. She had nodded the way people do when they don't believe you, but have decided not to push. Not yet. The Sunday my son Aaron came for dinner, he walked past the bedroom doorway on his way back from the bathroom and slowed down. Then he stepped inside and picked the watch up without asking. "Mom," he said, turning it over in his palm, "this is vintage. You know that, right? I've seen pieces like this go for real money at estate sales." "I know what it is," I said. "I've known for 41 years. He studied the case the way someone does when they're not really looking at what they're holding, when they're thinking about what it's worth instead of what it is. The brass had dulled slightly from sitting unused, and Thomas's initials, TRH, caught the light just enough to make out. "You should let me take it to a dealer," Aaron said. "Get it properly assessed. There's no reason for it to just sit here." "Leave it where it is," I said. He set it back down. But Krista, who had come to the doorway behind him, made a small sound in her throat. Not a word, just a breath, controlled and deliberate. I didn't look at her. I went back to the kitchen to check on dinner. That was the moment I should have paid closer attention to. Not what Aaron said. Not the way he set the watch down. That small sound from Krista. The sound of someone making a quiet adjustment to a plan. They left around 8. I stood at the front door and watched their headlights back down the driveway, then went inside and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink. The house was quiet in the way it gets when you've had people in it and they've gone. Not peaceful exactly, but hollow. After a while, I walked back to the bedroom. The watch was where Aaron had placed it. It looked the same spot. But it was sitting at a slightly different angle than it had been that morning, and when I picked it up, the weight of it told me something my eyes hadn't. The inner plate, a thin brass cover that fit flush behind the clock face, was off, just by a fraction. Thomas was precise about that watch in the particular way. He was precise about everything he cared about. 41 years of watching him handle it had made me precise about it too. I pressed the release catch and the plate swung open. A small square of paper was tucked into the recess behind it, folded very tight, thin as tissue. I had never seen it before in my life. My hands were steady when I picked it up, which surprised me. I unfolded it slowly at the edge of the bed. Thomas's handwriting. Block print, deliberate, the way he wrote when he needed something to be read without any confusion. An account number, a routing number, a bank name, First Heritage Trust, Columbus, and one line beneath, also in block print, for Margaret, when you need it. I read it twice. I sat down on the edge of the bed and read it a third time. Thomas had never mentioned a bank in Columbus, never said a word about a safety deposit box, or a separate account, or any arrangement I didn't know about. He had been gone 15 months, and in all that time I had believed I understood the shape of everything he'd left behind. There had been a morning, maybe a year before he got sick, when he'd taken my hand across the kitchen table and said something I hadn't fully understood at the time. "I've put some things in place," he said. "Not because I don't trust you. Because I do. Promise me you'll look if you ever need to." He hadn't explained further, and I hadn't pressed. After 41 years, you learn which silences are finished, and which ones are still working themselves out. That one had felt like the latter. I'd thought about it a handful of times after the funeral and then let it go. I'd had too much else to carry. Now I was thinking about it again. I didn't sleep well. By morning I had already made my decision. I called my sister Carol before I left. She's 40 minutes away, and she is the person I've trusted with the worst things in my life, since we were children in the same small house. I told her what I'd found. I told her where I was going. "Do you want me to come?" she asked. "No," I said. "I need to do this part alone, but I needed to tell someone first." A brief silence, then. "You call me the minute you know something. You hear me?" "I will," I said. I drove to Columbus by myself on a Tuesday morning in October. 2.5 hours with nothing but the highway and my own thoughts. The drive gave me time I wasn't sure I wanted. I kept returning to the timing. Aaron picking the watch up, the inner plate disturbed, Krista in the doorway making that quiet sound. Someone had been looking. Whether they'd found the paper and put it back without understanding what it was, or hadn't known where to look at all, I couldn't say. What I knew was that they had been looking. That stayed with me the whole way. First Heritage Trust sat on a quiet block in Columbus's older business district. Low building, no signage visible from the street, the kind of place that doesn't advertise itself because it doesn't need to. I sat in the parking lot for a moment before going in. The woman at the front desk was professional and pleasant, and her manner shifted slightly when I mentioned Thomas's name. Not dramatically, just a subtle adjustment, like a door opening a small degree wider. She asked for my ID, looked at it, typed something, and told me to wait a moment while she found the branch manager. His name was Mr. Donahue, a composed man in his 50s, careful and unhurried, who shook my hand and led me to a private office and closed the door. Your husband made arrangements here approximately 8 months before his passing, Mr. Donahue said. He was specific about the terms of access. What terms? I asked. Proof of identity, which you've provided. He paused. And one additional item. Your husband described it in considerable detail in the paperwork. A pocket watch. Brass case, approximately 90 years old. Initials engraved on the reverse. TRH. I opened my purse and set the watch on the desk between us. Mr. Donahue looked at it for a moment, then he nodded once. That's the one, he said. He led me to the vault himself and gave me privacy in the room once the box was out. I carried it to the small table in the center and stood there with my hands on the lid. I thought about Thomas sitting at the kitchen table in the dark of early morning, always awake before me, always doing something quiet and purposeful while the house was still asleep. Planning. Preparing. Carrying things he hadn't told me about yet because he wasn't ready to, or because he was trying to protect me, or both. I opened the box. Inside, a sealed envelope, a USB drive in a small plastic case, and a letter. The letter was on top. I unfolded it. My Margaret. If you're reading this, I couldn't find the right words while I was still here. I'm sorry for that. The reason wasn't doubt. I want you to know that. It was the opposite. I needed you to see this for yourself, in your own time, when you were ready. I had to stop reading for a moment. Just for a moment. About 2 years before I got sick, I noticed irregularities in our joint accounts, small amounts, always below the thresholds that trigger automatic flags. I told myself at first it was a bookkeeping error somewhere. But you know how careful I am with numbers. I checked again and again. The pattern was too consistent. I followed the transfers. They traced back to a business checking account in Aaron's name. But some of the authorizations came through a secondary user, an account added in Krista's name. I set the letter down on the table. I picked it up again. I don't believe Aaron set out to do this. He's not a cruel man, Maggie, but he spent a long time letting someone else steer, and somewhere along the way, he stopped asking whether the direction was right. That's a different kind of failing. Not malice. Not innocence either. The full record is on the drive. I documented everything I could find. The envelope has the trust documents. I worked with an attorney last spring. Everything we have is protected. The secondary account authorizations were revoked months ago. They may not know that yet. Whatever you decide to do next is yours to decide. I've left you the tools. I trust your judgment more than I've ever trusted anyone's. All my love, always, Thomas. I folded the letter and held it in both hands and didn't move for a long time. The envelope held documents, bank statements, transaction records, a handwritten summary in Thomas's precise block print at the front. The total at the bottom of the summary page was $112,000. $112,000 across 26 months, every withdrawal sized carefully to avoid triggering automatic review. Thomas's margin notes, cross-reference dates and account numbers with the discipline of someone who had spent months making sure there was nothing ambiguous about what he was looking at. I checked into a hotel that evening, rather than driving home. I needed one night, somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere with no weight attached to any of it. I opened the USB on my laptop after dinner. The files were organized exactly the way Thomas organized everything, clearly labeled, chronological. I found the communications folder and opened it. Exported texts, Aaron's number on one side, Krista's on the other. "This won't last forever," Krista had written. "We need to move while we still can. She trusts you completely. She's never going to look. Aaron, it still doesn't feel right. Krista, Aaron, we are $38,000 behind on the Brecksville property. If we lose that one, the whole portfolio goes with it. Your mother has more than enough. This isn't stealing, it's temporary. Aaron, she doesn't know it's temporary. Krista, she doesn't need to know yet. Just let me handle the amounts. You don't even have to think about it." I closed the laptop. I sat at the small desk in the hotel room and looked at the wall. After a while, I called Carol. "I found it," I said when she picked up. She didn't ask me to explain. She said, "Are you all right?" "Not entirely," I said, "but I know what I'm going to do." I drove home the next morning. The house looked exactly as I had left it. The same pale yellow siding, the same oak tree Thomas had planted the year Aaron was born, the same blue curtains in the front window. Everything exactly as it had always been. Everything completely different. I called Aaron that evening. My voice was even. I told him I'd like to have them both over for dinner Saturday. He said that sounded nice and asked if everything was okay. I said everything was fine, that I just thought it was past time for us all to sit down together. There was a pause on his end, brief but there. Then he said Saturday worked. I spent the following days in a state of calm I didn't entirely recognize in myself. I contacted Mr. Greer, the attorney whose name appeared on the trust documents, and confirmed that everything Thomas had set up was fully executed and legally binding. I made an appointment for the following week. I gathered the letter, the envelope, the USB, and I put them in the bag I would bring to dinner. On Saturday, I set the table the way I always had. Good china. The blue tablecloth Thomas liked. I made pot roast because Aaron had loved it since he was 7 years old, and because I needed something purposeful to do with my hands while I waited. They arrived at 6:30. Krista brought a bottle of wine and a smile, and commented on how good the house smelled. Aaron hugged me in the doorway, and held on a half-second longer than usual, which told me something about what he already understood was coming. We sat down and ate, and the conversation was pleasant, in the surface way that conversations can be when everyone is being careful. Krista mentioned they were looking at a new investment property. Aaron talked about work. I listened and said the right things and waited. After the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I reached into my bag and set the envelope on the table. Neither of them spoke immediately. Krista looked at the envelope. Aaron looked at me. "I went to Columbus last week," I said. "A bank called First Heritage Trust. Your father had something there that he left for me." "Mom," Aaron started. "Let me finish," I said, not sharply, just clearly. He stopped. I placed the summary document on the table, then the first 3 transaction records beside it, and I let them look. Krista leaned back slightly in her chair. Her expression didn't change. It stayed composed, just a degree more rigid than before. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding," she said. "Those transfers could reflect any number of legitimate things. Business expenses, joint allocations that were properly recorded. They weren't," I said. She adjusted her posture. "Margaret, I understand this looks alarming. We were under enormous financial pressure. The rental properties were in serious trouble, and I know about the rental properties," I said. That stopped her. I set the USB on the table. "Your texts are on here," I said. "Both of yours. All of them." The room went quiet in a particular way. The kind of quiet where everyone has stopped pretending. Then Krista said, in a voice I hadn't heard from her before, flat and stripped of anything warm, "You're making this into something it isn't." "Krista," Aaron's voice very low. She looked at him. "Stop," he said. One word. But the way he said it, the way his jaw set, the way he didn't look away, told me more than anything else that had happened that evening. Krista looked at Aaron for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Then she reached for her purse. "I think," she said, "that you two need some time." She stood. She was still composed. "I'll give her that. A great deal of practice. I'll wait in the car." She walked to the door without hurrying and closed it behind her with a soft, final click. Aaron and I sat in the silence that followed. Then he said, "I knew something like this would come eventually." "Did you?" I asked. He nodded slowly, looking at the table. "Not this exactly. But I knew. I think I've known for a while that what we were doing wasn't." He stopped, then started again, more carefully. "I told myself we'd pay it back before you ever found out. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things, Mom." "I know," I said. "I read them." He flinched. "Your father wrote that he didn't believe you set out to cause harm," I said. "He was very specific about that. He also wrote that it didn't make you innocent." Aaron pressed his eyes closed. When he opened them, they were wet. "I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen," I said. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right, because it isn't. But here is what happens next." I kept my voice level and clear. "I've already been in contact with Mr. Greer, the attorney your father worked with. A formal repayment plan will be structured through his office. You will sign it and you will honor it. The full amount, over whatever timeline he determines, is workable." I paused. "And Krista has no further access to anything connected to your father's estate. That is not a negotiation." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think I already knew that too." "I'm not taking this to the police," I said. "That's my choice and I've made it. But Aaron, if you want any kind of future with me, the repayment is not optional and it does not get renegotiated. Do you understand that?" He said. His voice was rough. "I understand." I looked at my son. The boy who used to save me the last of whatever dessert we'd made because he thought I hadn't had enough. The man who had let himself be steered somewhere he knew was wrong and had told himself it was unavoidable. He looked exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a lie for a long time and is finally setting it down. "Go home," I said. "Think about what kind of life you want. Then call Mr. Greer's office Monday morning." At the door he stopped. "I'm sorry, Mom." His voice broke slightly at the end. "I know you are," I said. "That matters, but sorry is just the beginning of it." He nodded. Then he left. I stood at the window until the taillights were gone. Then I stood there a little longer. Then I went and put the dishes in the sink, because the dishes still needed doing. The months that followed were not easy, but they were clear. And clarity is its own kind of relief, even when what's clear is painful. Aaron called Mr. Greer that Monday. The repayment agreement was drafted and signed before Thanksgiving, 14 months, structured installments, the full $112,000. He signed it without asking to renegotiate a single term. That told me something. He and Krista separated in January. He didn't explain much about it when he told me, and I didn't ask for more than he offered. He just said one afternoon, while we were sitting at the kitchen table, that he had spent a long time making choices that didn't feel like they'd come from him. That he wasn't sure when that had started, but he was trying to figure out how to stop. I thought about what Thomas had written. He stopped asking whether the decisions were right, and I kept it to myself. I just listened. He came by more regularly after that. He helped me with the oak tree in March. It did need trimming, as it turned out. And in April, he fixed the gutter on the back of the house that Thomas had been meaning to get to for 2 years. Small things. The kind of things you do when you're trying to rebuild something, without quite saying that's what you're doing. One afternoon in May, he knocked on the door, and when I opened it, he was holding Thomas's pocket watch. "I had it cleaned," he said. "There's a place downtown that specializes in antique movements. They said it's in good shape. The mechanism still runs." He held it out to me. I thought it should go back where it belongs. I took it from him. The brass was brighter now, buffed but not overdone, and the initials on the back were sharp and clear again. I ran my thumb across them. "Come in," I said. "I'll make coffee." We sat at the kitchen table for a long while and talked about ordinary things. The oak tree, a trip he was thinking about taking, whether I'd considered getting a dog to keep me company in the evenings. Not about repayment schedules or attorneys or everything that had been broken and was now, slowly and imperfectly, being pieced back together. Just ordinary things. The way ordinary things eventually come back when the heavy ones have been dealt with properly. When he left, I carried the watch to the bedroom and set it on Thomas's nightstand, the exact spot where it had always been. I stood there for a moment, looking at it. The room was quiet. The late afternoon light came in, low through the curtains, and fell across the nightstand, the way it always had. Thomas hadn't left me a warning. He had left me something more useful than that, a foundation, solid ground to stand on when everything else shook. He had trusted me to find it in my own time, and to know what to do when I did. And he had been right to trust me, which is maybe the thing I most needed to understand. I reached out and touched the watch lightly with 2 fingers. The brass was cool and smooth, and exactly as heavy as it had always been. Some things, I had learned, you carry differently. Once you understand what they've been holding all along,